Hello, everybody there. This is our fifth topic in OB. Today we are dealing with perception and individual decision making. I hope you have been enjoying the other topics that we have had before. This is another very important topic for us to discuss. What is perception and why is it important? By definition, perception is a process by which individuals organize and interpret their sensory impressions in order to give meaning to the environment. And indeed, people's behavior is based on their perception of what reality is, and not necessarily on reality itself. So, the world as it is perceived is a world that is behaviorally important. Perception is very, very important because our perception determines how we behave. If you perceive that something is hard, you probably will find it difficult to do it. If you perceive that something is easy, you'll find it easy to do it. It's just a matter of perception. If you think that OB is very hard, you'll find it difficult to follow. But if you perceive that OB is manageable or easy, then you'll be able to follow the course easily. What are the factors that influence perception? There are basically three factors that influence perception. The first is the factors in the perceiver, in you, because you are the perceiver. What influences your perception? So your attitude influences your perception. Your motives, your interests, your experience, your expectations, all these influence your perception. In fact, when I was trying to describe what perception is, somebody would think it is also attitude, because there is a similarity between perception and attitude. Your attitude to something can make you succeed or fail. So perception is influenced by attitude. I've just said that if you think that OB is very difficult, you'll find it difficult to follow. But if you perceive that it is easy, you'll find it easy to follow. So there's an element of attitude in everything that we perceive. Just like motives, what is your motive for doing something? It will determine how you perceive it. What are your interests? Do you love the course? Do you love your program? Do you love what you're doing? That will determine how you perceive it. If you don't love something, even your perception of that thing will be different. So those are the factors of the perceiver. It's very important, you as perceiver, to know what determines your perception. The second set of determinants are the factors in the situation itself, the environment, the time of the day, the setting, like work setting, and the social setting. Those settings are very, very important. Your group, the group you live with, the group you stay with, determine how you also perceive something. If you live with a group that are negative all the time, definitely your perception will be negative. Your background matters a lot. The social setting matters a lot. So those are the factors that determine perception. And the last set of factors that determine perception are the factors in the target itself. What is it What is it that you are perceiving? What is it that you're perceiving? So under these factors, we have novelty. How original is something? How new is something? If something is new, your perception might be different. That's why sometimes if we're meeting something for the first time, we normally have a negative attitude because we are not sure how reliable or how good the thing is. So sometimes when we meet people for the first time, we might be biased. We don't know their conduct. We don't know their habits. We don't know their character. Sometimes we may have a negative perception. So some novelty of something will determine your perception. There's also the issue of sounds. Issue of sound, because we perceive even objects. Even with we perceive objects. So the sound that we get from the environment, or the sound that we get from what the object of perception will determine our perception. So we also have size, we also have the background, we also have the proximity and similarity. All these are factors that determine perception. You'll follow that later in details when you're doing your assignment or when you're doing your reading. But those are very important factors. I think you can identify with some of these things even as I talk. So how do we perceive? How do we perceive? Here we're dealing now with person perception, which is making judgments about others. How do we perceive? So we'll start here with attribution theory. When individuals observe behavior, they attempt to determine whether it is internally or externally caused. When we observe somebody and we see a particular behavior in that person, or we observe something that person does, we can attribute what we observe to either internal or external forces. That distinction depends largely on its distinctiveness, the consensus, and consistency. Distinctiveness shows the different behaviors in different situations. Consensus is the response if the response is the same as others to the same situation, and consistency is when the response is the same over time. Now, a good example here is when an employee is late for work. You might attribute that to his either partying or drinking and oversleeping. This is internal attribution. That is internal attribution. But if you attribute his lateness to traffic jam, you are making an external attribution. So person perception is based on attribution. And most of the judgments we make on people is based on attribution. And we can allocate attribution into internal and external. And most often, we judge people unfairly because we attribute most of the behaviors to internal factors. If you attribute the cause of behavior to external factors, you are actually becoming a little bit fair and non-judgmental. Because like the case we have just seen, to find that your colleague has come late to work, if you think that it was traffic that was a problem, you will be fair. I mean, your attitude towards this person will be more positive. But if you thought it was because he overdrank last night, he took too much beer and overslept, that will be a negative perception. And of course, your attitude to him or her will be different and will be negative. So this is the attribution theory in summary. It has elements of distinctiveness. It has elements of consensus. It has elements of consistency. Is the behavior distinctive? Is the behavior distinctive? I mean, if somebody does something, is that behavior different from the behavior that somebody else would behave? I mean, somebody else's behavior. Is that the behavior distinctive? Is it attributed to that person or it is general? Because there are things which are distinctive. If you give somebody a negative feedback, how does that person react? There are people who react differently. So you can judge somebody. You give a negative feedback today, and he reacts positively. The next time he reacts positively. That is, you know that behavior is distinctive. It's not general. But there's also consensus whereby people agree that this is the behavior. They agree on the nature of the behavior. The outcome of the behavior is agreeable. Is agreeable to a group of people. And consistency here is when a behavior is repeated. You do something and you always expect similar results. Consistency. Now, our perception of people's behavior are determined by these factors. Is the behavior distinctive? Is there a consensus on the behavior? Or is the behavior consistent? Once these are all high, you can know that you can now say that this person's behavior is internal due to internal factors, or it is due to external factors. Of course, if it scores high on external, you can say these are external factors. If it scores low in internal factors, then you can say this factor is, and so on and so on. So that's how we can attribute behavior of people. Attributions also have errors and biases. So one of the fundamental attribution error is the tendency to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors when making judgments about behavior of others. This is typical. All Adam's children will do this. They will think that every action, every behavior is internal, because they are very quick to point fingers to their friends, very quick to point fingers, their colleagues. But the issue is, have you thought through and evaluated the situation well enough to know whether this behavior was influenced by internal or by external factors? I mean, a person came late to work and you think that he overdrank, overpartied last night. What would make you think so? Of course, if he has been regularly doing that, then you would be right to say, oh, I am not surprised you are usually late because of this and that. But if you don't have the background, it would be bad for you to make an attribution that this one's behavior is because of his internal problems, internal weaknesses. He is a drunkard. That's why he came late today. But if you attribute that to external factor, traffic jam, or there was a problem in the family, or the wife was sick, or the child was sick, then you will reduce the attribution error to some extent. So there are so many errors and biases in attributions. One of them is self-serving bias. What is a self-serving bias? This is a tendency for individuals to attribute their own successes to internal factors while putting the blame for failures on external factors. Of course, nobody uh, will want to associate successes with external factors all the time. Because if you did work, if you worked hard, you'll always say, I worked hard, that's why I've been able to succeed. But if you fail, you don't want to be part of it. You say it is because of external factors that I failed. There's an example here. When students get A in an exam, they often say they studied hard. But when they don't do well, then they say, the exam was hard, the teacher didn't teach so well, I was sick, and so on and so on. So they attribute the problem to something else. That is self-serving bias. We always want to own success and call it internal. I made it. And when you fail, then you say, no, it is not because I didn't work hard. No, it is something else. That is self-serving bias. It's also what we call shortcuts to judging others. These are also problems of perception, shortcuts to judging others. And we start here with what we call selective perception. What is selective perception? This is where people selectively interpret what they see on the basis of their interests, their backgrounds, their experience, and their attitudes. Selective perception. Selective perception. If you like dark people, you will always look at them with positive attitude. You always like them. Every black person or a dark person or dark-skinned person, you always like them. And the opposite is true if you don't like the other skin color. So we always have what we call selective perception. We select what we perceive. We select what we perceive. Eventually, this is what we call bias. You are biased. So everything that fits your bias, you'll select it, you'll choose it. What doesn't fit your bias, you will not choose it. And so these are other problems with perception, and we call it frequently used shortcuts in judging others. Apart from selective perception, we also have the problem of halo effect. Halo effect. This is where you draw a general impression about an individual on the basis of a single characteristic. You like tall men, you like tall women, And so once you look, you see a tall man and tall woman, you say, aha, that guy is cool. That woman is cool. That guy can manage this work. That woman can manage this work. And so that's the halo effect. One impression about somebody makes you to make a general conclusion about the person. Just the height. For you, the height is the magic. Once you see the height, you say, hey, this is a man. This is a woman who can manage this work. There's also what we call contrast effects. So this is evaluation of a person's characteristic that are affected by comparisons with other people presently encountered when in the rank, when in the rank, when the higher or lower of the same characteristics. This is a problem of comparison. You become a victim because of the contrast effect. The person who's going to interview you has just interviewed somebody who is much better than you. So when you come in, they will use the other person as a yardstick for comparing you. So there are so many characteristics that can be used here. The smartness or the ability to communicate. If somebody is eloquent, if the person before you has been very eloquent, once you come in, they will use the other person as a yardstick to measure your performance. They will be contrasting you with the other person. Whatever you do, they will be contrasting with the person before you. That's what we call the contrast effect. There's also what we call projection. This is another problem in perception. Projection. What is projection? It is attributing one's own characteristics to other people. I think this is, I don't know, but it's like you look like the picture you see there. When you look at that picture, you can make some conclusion. You can make some conclusion. What do you project about that person that appears in the picture there? What do you project? Okay, so there's also the problem of stereotyping. Stereotyping is judging someone on the basis of one's perception of the group to which that person belongs. That man with a big nose, that man with a pointed nose, that woman with a big nose, that woman with a pointed nose, that Muganda, that Muchiga, that Mucholi, and so on. So the stereotyping, judging someone on the basis of one's perception of the group to which that person belongs. You have a bias about a particular group, and so anybody that coming from that group is put in the same bracket and judged the same way, regardless of whether he is very good or whether he is not very good. That's the problem of stereotyping. That is a perception, selective perception. There's also the problem of now, having looked at all those problems of attribution, let's now look at the applications. How do you apply perception in organizations? We'll look at a few points here. In employment interview, we use a lot of perception. I have just mentioned some of the examples here. We use a lot of perception in interviews. Sometimes you don't pass an interview because you were the best, but the perception that people carry of you in that interview may end up giving you a job. If you're eloquent, they might think that you are very good, but then you may have other problems which they are not able to know. So in employment interview, we use perception a lot, but also in performance expectations. So we expect people to perform at work. So perception, our perception of a person also determine whether we expect the person to perform better or lower, to perform higher or lower. So perceptions is important in performance, and later on we also look at in performance evaluation itself, because sometimes also performance evaluations are done, but you find that the evaluations are not objective because of the issues of perception. And there's also the problem of ethnic profiling. This is a form of stereotyping in which a group of individuals are singled out, typically on the basis of race, for intensive scrutiny or investigation. You go to an interview, and because you come from a certain region, they ask you a lot more questions, subject to a lot more tests than your friends. That's ethnic profiling. So there's also what we call appraisals. Appraisals are normally supposed to be objective, but in the real world, it is not. So some people can present themselves as very active and therefore give an impression that they are very hardworking, and so they can buy the judgment of their bosses. In the real sense, they are not hardworking, and therefore they will be given high evaluation when actually they don't perform very well. So now we're coming to the last part of our presentation, the link between perceptions and individual decision making. So decision making starts with a problem. And a problem is a discrepancy between the current state of affairs and the desired state. So if you have a problem, what do? You need to solve that problem. And therefore a decision is necessary. So decisions are choices made from among alternatives developed from that are perceived as relevant. So we are going to link perception and decision making in our next presentation. So decision making is important, and so there are models that have been developed for decision making. One of them is called the rational decision making model. This describes how individuals should behave in order to maximize some outcome. There are steps in rational decision making model, and we have presented 6 of them. When you have a problem, you just need to, the first step is to define the problem. After that, you identify the decision criteria. How are you going to decide what to do and what not to do? After that, you go to allocate the weights to the different criteria, and then you develop the alternatives, and then you evaluate the alternatives, and then select the best alternative. This is what we call the rational decision-making model, what we definitely call optimization. Optimization, sometimes it is minimization of costs, sometimes it is maximization of profits. But that's what we call rational decision-making model. It goes through steps. Now, decision-making may also involve the issue of creativity. Creativity is also very important. So some problem solving may require creativity. Because as we've just seen, every decision starts with a problem. But problem solving may require creativity. So what is creativity? This is the ability to produce a novel or useful ideas. The three components of creativity are expertise, creativity skills, and task motivation. So we're back to decision making in an organization. How are decisions actually made in organizations? We mentioned rational decision making before with 6 steps, but in reality, organization may not follow those 6 steps. There is what we call the bounded rationality. This is where individuals make decisions by constructing simplified models that extract the essential features from problems without capturing all their complexity. Bounded rationality. Bounded rationality. Normally, when you have a problem, you may not have to go through all these 6 steps. You may find shortcuts using either background information or using your past experience or using your intelligence or using your intuition to come up with a problem, how to solve that problem without going through the 6 steps of bounded, 6 steps of rational decision-making process. Now, what are some of the problems in decision-making? One is overconfidence bias, believing too much in your ability to make good decisions. There's also the problem of anchoring bias, using early received information as the basis for making subsequent judgments. Your prior information you had, using it as a basis for subsequent judgment. Your past experience, that can be a problem. Confirmation bias, using only the facts that support your decision. Using only the facts that support your decision. There's also availability bias, using information that is most readily at hand, either recent or vivid. Then there's representative bias, mixing apples with oranges, assessing the likelihood of an occurrence by trying to match it with pre-existing category, using only the facts that support our decision. And then the winner's curse. The highest bidder pays too much. The likelihood of the winner's curse to increase the number of people in the auction. Okay, we're about to complete this There's also other biases and errors. The escalation of commitment, meaning in spite of new negative information, commitment actually increases. There's also the randomness error, which is creating meaning out of random events. Insight bias, which is looking back once the outcome has been and believing that actually precedes outcome of an event. Decision making can also be made using intuition, which is an unconscious process created out of distilled experience. Conditions favoring intuitive decision making are high level of uncertainty. There is little precedent to draw on. Facts do not clearly point the way, or analytical data are of little use. What makes differences in decision making? Personality. Aspects of conscientiousness and escalation of commitment. Personality. We studied personality last in topic 4, in topic 3. And so we know that there are personality traits that go with that fit with particular jobs. So decision making can be affected by the nature of personality, but also affected by self-esteem, and also by gender. So what are the constraints to decision making? Performance evaluation, reward system, formal regulations. Organizational rules and policies limit the alternative choices for decision makers. System-imposed time constraint. Organizations require decisions by specific deadlines, and then historical precedent. Past decisions influence current decisions. So decision making can also be influenced by culture. And so we have the issue of problem selection, time orientation, importance of logic and rationality, belief in the ability of people to solve problems, preference, ethics in decision making. Ethics in decision making. How do we improve decision making? Analyze the situation and adjust your decision making style to fit that situation. Be aware of the biases and try to limit their impact. Combine rational analysis with intuitions to increase decision making. Effectiveness. Don't assume that your specific decision style is appropriate to every situation. And finally, enhance personal creativity by looking for novel solutions or seeing problem in your perspective.